She cried over hash browns. Fork clattered. Knees buckled. Shoulders heaving until her whole body shook. Tears mixing with butter and salt. Hershey's Coca-Cola ice cold. Fizzing. She'd spent weeks in a bunker outside Cherbourg. Watched Hamburg burn. Smelled her mother's kitchen turn to ash. The last black loaf gone green with mold. Hunger taught her to swallow shame and choke on pride. And then an American cook piled her plate twice. A black soldier left chocolate in her laundry. A sergeant handed an extra serving without asking. How does a Hershey's bar and a second helping undo 4 years of war? The canvas flap snapped open. 23 women flinched as one. Frida Kessler's hands were locked in her lap, fingernails digging into her palms hard enough to leave marks. 6 weeks ago, she'd been intercepting Allied radio transmissions in a bunker outside Cherbourg. 3 weeks ago, American soldiers had surrounded their position. 2 weeks ago, she'd watched the last piece of black bread in her possession turn green with mold. Now the truck lurched to a stop in Louisiana. "Out you come, ladies," the guard said. American, young, maybe 20. His rifle hung loose on his shoulder like an afterthought. The propaganda had been specific. Allied camps meant interrogation cells, beatings, worse things the officers wouldn't name but made sure the women understood. Frida had spent the entire journey from the coast preparing herself for concrete floors and darkness. Instead, she stepped down into grass. Green grass, not the scorched, trampled mud of the Western Front, but actual lawn, trimmed and absurdly healthy under a sun so bright it hurt. Barracks stood in neat rows, freshly painted. Someone had planted flowers. Actual flowers, red and yellow, like the war was something happening on another planet. The smell hit her next. Bacon. Frying bacon. The scent was so foreign, so impossible that Frida's knees actually buckled. The woman behind her, Marlene, the nurse, still somehow standing perfectly straight despite everything, caught her elbow. "Steady," Marlene whispered in German. "It's a trick. Don't react." But the young guard was already offering Frida a canteen. "You thirsty? It's just water, promise. Long trip from the coast." Frida stared at the canteen like it might explode. In her experience, guards didn't offer things. They took, they demanded, they struck. This boy just smiled and waited. She took the canteen with shaking hands. The water was cold, actually cold, like it had been kept somewhere dark and cool, not pulled warm from a well. She drank, and the guard nodded approval. No mockery in his face at all. "Come on," he said, jerking his head toward a low building. "Y'all must be starving. Breakfast is still going." The messal made no sense. Frida had been hungry for so long that the concept had lost meaning. Hunger was just the baseline, the static hum of daily existence. You didn't think about it anymore. You thought about work, about survival, about whether the next Allied bombing run would catch you in the open. You didn't think about this. Mountains of scrambled eggs glistening with butter. Bacon piled on metal trays still sizzling. Toast. Actual white bread. Not the sawdust mixture they'd been choking down for years. And coffee. Real coffee. Not the acorn substitute that tasted like dirt and regret. 23 German women stood frozen in the doorway. American soldiers sat at long tables eating and talking and laughing like this wasn't the most surreal thing that had ever happened. Like feeding enemy prisoners feast-level food was just Tuesday morning routine. "Don't be shy," the cook said. Big man, maybe 50, with an apron stained with grease and a face that looked like it smiled often. "You'll grab a tray. Get in line. We got plenty." "Plenty?" The word sounded obscene. Frida picked up a metal tray. Her hands were still shaking. The woman ahead of her, Sigrid, the surgical nurse who'd worked 72-hour shifts in field hospitals, was crying silently, tears just running down her face as she stared at the food. The cook didn't comment, just started loading their trays. Eggs, bacon, toast with actual butter, yellow and soft. Then he reached for a pan of something golden brown and crispy, shredded into strips, and dumped a massive portion onto Frida's tray. She stared at it. It looked like straw. Burned straw fried and scattered across her plate like someone was mocking her. Like the real food was the joke, and this was the punchline. "Here's your German prison ration. Animal feed. Eat up." "What is this?" The English came out broken, her accent thick with suspicion. The cook, his name tag said, "Earl," grinned. "Hash browns, honey. You ain't never had hash browns." Around her, the other women were whispering in German. Ininga's voice tight with fear. "Is it a test?" Marlene, cold and certain. "Don't eat it. It's humiliation." Sigrid, exhausted. I don't even care anymore. Frida sat down at a table. American soldiers at the next table over were eating the same thing, laughing and talking, completely unbothered. One of them noticed her staring and gave her a thumbs up. She picked up her fork. The smart thing would be to refuse, to maintain dignity, to show these Americans that German women couldn't be broken with tricks and theater. But Frida Kessler was so hungry she could taste her own teeth. She speared the smallest possible piece of the golden brown straw and brought it to her mouth, bracing for humiliation. For the taste of hay or worse, potato. Potato fried in butter. Crispy on the outside, soft inside, salted, seasoned with something sharp and good, maybe onion, maybe pepper. The taste exploded across her tongue like a memory of being human, of Sunday breakfast before the war, of her mother's kitchen in Bremen before the bombing. She took another bite, bigger. This time, then another. Somewhere in the back of her brain, the part that still remembered dignity, tried to slow her down, but her hands weren't listening. Her fork was moving faster, scooping up the hash browns, the eggs, everything, shoveling it into her mouth like she was afraid someone would take it away. And then she was crying. Not pretty crying, not silent, dignified tears, full ugly sobbing. The kind that came from somewhere deep in her chest. The kind she'd been holding back since Cherbourg, since watching her hometown burn, since realizing Germany was going to lose, and everything she'd believed was a lie. She cried over fried potatoes. The entire mess hall went quiet. 20 American soldiers stopped eating. 22 German women stopped breathing. Even Earl the cook, spatula still in hand, just stood there watching. Frida couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop eating. Hash browns falling off her fork, tears mixing with butter and salt. She was making sounds she didn't recognize. Animal sounds of grief and relief and hunger. Finally being answered. Marlene reached for her shoulder. Frida. But Frida shook her off, gasping between sobs, and just kept eating. From across the room, one of the American soldiers, an older sergeant with kind eyes, stood up and walked to the kitchen. Came back with another full plate of hash browns. Set it down in front of Frida without a word. She looked up at him, face wet, unable to speak. He just nodded. It's all right, ma'am. Take your time. And Frida Kessler, former Luftwaffe communications officer, enemy of the United States, broke down completely over her second serving of breakfast, while the American soldiers just quietly went back to eating, giving her the grace of not staring anymore. It was the kindest thing anyone had done to her in years. The package on Marlene's workstation wasn't there when she left for the latrine. She stared at it. Brown paper wrapper, silver foil peeking through a tear at the corner. The words Hershey's in blocky letters she could barely read but understood anyway. Chocolate around her. Steam hissed from the industrial presses. The other women fed olive drab shirts through rollers, their movements mechanical. After 2 weeks of identical routine, no one looked at Marlene's station. No one needed to. They all knew who'd left it. PFC Jerome Washington stood across the laundry facility, pretending to check supply inventory. His back was to her, but his shoulders were tight, waiting. Marlene's hands stayed flat on the folding table. She was 22 years old. She'd run field hospitals under artillery fire. She'd sewn men back together while bombs shook the walls. She'd still believed, in the fatherland, in the mission, in everything she'd been taught about racial hierarchy and the natural order of the world. The black soldier from Alabama had just left her chocolate. She picked up the bar. The paper crinkled. Too loud. Her fingers found the seam, started to tear, then stopped. This was a test. Had to be some American trick to make her grateful, compliant, broken. She set it back down. 3 minutes passed. The steam pressed on. Cigarette glanced over, raised an eyebrow, said nothing. Marlene picked it up again. The wrapper came off in one smooth pull. The chocolate underneath was divided into neat rectangles, dark brown and perfect. She hadn't seen chocolate since her birthday in 1942. Her mother had saved ration cards for 3 months to buy her a small bar. They'd eaten it together in the kitchen while her father listened to the radio announce glorious victory. That kitchen was ash now. Her mother's letters had stopped coming in January. Marlene broke off one square, just one, to prove she could stop. The chocolate hit her tongue, and she forgot how to breathe. Sweet, creamy, rich in a way that made her teeth ache. She'd forgotten food could taste like this. Forgotten anything could taste like this. The second square disappeared before she decided to take it. By the fourth, her hands were shaking. She grabbed the rest of the bar and walked. Not ran, walked, because Marlene O'Cade did not run to the supply closet. Shoved inside between boxes of detergent and starch. Closed the door. Darkness. The smell of soap. Her heart hammering against her ribs. She ate the entire bar in 4 minutes, crammed it into her mouth like an animal, chocolate smearing on her fingers, her lips, not caring, not thinking, just the desperate need to consume it before someone took it away, before the war came back, before the hunger returned. When it was gone, she stood there holding the empty wrapper, breathing hard in the chemical-scented dark. She hated herself, hated her weakness, hated that she'd taken it, that she'd wanted it, that even now she wanted more, hated that it had come from him. The door opened, light stabbed in. Frida stood there, her expression unreadable. "The guard's asking why you're hiding in the closet," she said quietly. Marlene walked out, head high, face composed. She returned to her station, tucked the wrapper into her pocket, and pressed shirts for the next 3 hours without looking up once. Jerome Washington never turned around. The next morning, another Hershey's bar appeared. Marlene stared at it for 11 minutes this time. 11 minutes of her hands gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white, jaw clenched so hard her teeth hurt. She took it to the supply closet again, ate it in 5 minutes instead of 4, told herself tomorrow she'd refuse. Day 3, another bar, 6 minute eating time. She was getting slower, trying to make it last. Day 4, she almost threw it away, held it over the trash bin, her hand trembling, ready to prove she was stronger than this, ready to prove the ideology meant more than chocolate. She ate it in the bathroom stall instead. Day 5, she found a U.S. Army shirt on, her folding table wrinkled and abandoned. Without thinking, she pressed it, folded it, made the creases so sharp they could cut, left it on the counter where Jerome usually collected laundry for distribution. When she came back from lunch, there was a Hershey's bar and a Baby Ruth. She ate them both. Week 2 of the chocolate. Marlene started folding all of Jerome's laundry. Not just shirts, trousers with knife-edge creases, socks paired and rolled, undershirts stacked by size. She did it automatically now, her hands moving while her mind screamed at her to stop, to resist, to remember who she was. Every evening a different candy bar appeared, sometimes 2. Once a whole handful of Tootsie Rolls that she ate in the supply closet while crying silently into her hands. They still hadn't spoken, not one word. He left chocolate. She left perfect laundry. The exchange happened in silence, witnessed by 22 other women who said nothing because what could they say? That their most devoted believer was being seduced by enemy sugar? That she was trading her principles for processed cocoa? That she couldn't stop? Week 3. Marlene found her shoebox, started saving the wrappers, smoothed them flat, stacked them carefully, hid them under her bunk, counted them every night like currency. 16 Hershey's bars, for Baby Ruth's, 1 Milky Way, 23 Tootsie Rolls, evidence of her surrender, cataloged in silver foil. The music started on a Friday. Jerome was humming while he sorted linens. Something low and rhythmic that Marlene didn't recognize. American music, probably jazz, which the propaganda had taught her was degenerate, primitive, dangerous. It was beautiful. She caught herself swaying slightly while pressing a sheet, stopped immediately, looked around to see if anyone noticed. Secret was smiling into her work, not looking at Marlene, but smiling anyway. That afternoon's chocolate came with a note, just 4 words in careful English. "You like music?" Marlene stared at it for so long the iron scorched a shirt. She didn't write back. But the next day, when Jerome was humming again, something brighter this time, with a swing to it, she didn't stop herself from swaying. Just a little, just enough. The following week, he left her a Hershey's bar and hummed the same song while she ate it in the supply closet. The melody bleeding through the door like a promise she wasn't ready to accept. But she was learning the tune anyway. By week 5, Marlene had a shoebox containing 43 candy wrappers, a crumpled note she'd read 200 times, and the slowly crumbling certainty that she knew anything about the world at all. She still believed in the ideology. She told herself that every morning. But she also believed Jerome Washington's chocolate tasted better than any she'd had before the war. Both things were true, and that was the problem. The baseball diamond at Camp Ruston shimmered in the May heat, the air thick enough to chew. Sigrid Holtz sat on a splintered wooden bleacher, a glass of lemonade sweating in her hand, watching absolute chaos unfold before her. 9 men stood scattered across a dirt field. Another man threw a ball. Someone swung a wooden stick. People screamed like their lives depended on it. She had no idea what was happening. "Strike 2, bellowed an umpire in padding that made him look like an overfed beetle. The American GIs around her groaned in unison. The Italian PS from the camp down the road, who'd apparently been invited to form the opposing team, cheered and whistled. Sigrid took a sip of her lemonade, the tartness making her eyes water, and tried to understand why grown men were having emotional breakdowns over a leather sphere. For 4 years, she'd run field hospitals, amputations without morphine, soldiers bleeding out on tables made from barn doors, cities reduced to ash while she stitched wounds by candlelight because the generators had been bombed 3 days prior. These people were screaming about whether a ball landed inside or outside. An arbitrary white line. "You following this, hun?" asked Betty Torres, the Mexican-American GI who worked the camp canteen. She'd plopped down next to Secret without asking, bringing the scent of popcorn and juicy fruit gum. "No," Secret admitted. "Not even slightly," Betty grinned. "Good. Neither does anyone else. We just pretend." On the field, the batter, a lanky Italian prisoner with arms like pipe cleaners, wound up for another swing. The pitcher, an American farm boy with sunburned shoulders, hurled the ball with theatrical intensity. Crack. The sound was different this time, sharper. The ball launched into the sky like it had been fired from artillery, arcing up and out toward the fence in deep right field. The entire crowd rose as one body. Every person tracking the ball's trajectory with the same desperate focus. Secret had seen in surgeons watching a patient's vital signs. Go, go, go. Betty was on her feet, lemonade sloshing. The right fielder sprinted backward, glove extended, legs pumping. The ball sailed over his head, over the fence, disappearing into a stand of pine trees beyond the camp boundary. The crowd detonated. Americans and Italians alike were jumping, screaming, pounding each other's backs. The pipe cleaner batter trotted around the bases with his arms raised like he'd just liberated Rome single-handedly. Someone's dog, a mutt of indeterminate heritage, escaped its owner and began running the bases behind him, tongue flapping. A vendor threw an entire bag of peanuts into the air in celebration. They rained down on the bleachers like strange salty hail, and Sigrid started laughing. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd locked away in 1941, when the war stopped being abstract and started being screaming soldiers and burning buildings. A laugh that recognized the towering absurdity of this moment. That while her hometown of Hamburg was a crater, while her sister's last letter had mentioned eating potato peels for dinner, these people had the luxury, the freedom to care less desperately about a man hitting a ball with a stick. She laughed harder, couldn't stop. The laughter built until she was doubled over, gasping, tears streaming down her face because it was so stupid and so wonderful, and she'd forgotten that stupid, wonderful things were allowed to exist. Betty was staring at her. So were 3 American GIs. So was Frida, sitting 2 rows back with hash brown crumbs still on her collar from breakfast. "You okay?" Betty asked carefully. Sigrid wiped her eyes. "I have no idea." Betty reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out a glass bottle, condensation beating on its curves. The liquid inside was dark brown, almost black, with bubbles rising through it like tiny, desperate prisoners trying to escape. "Here," Betty said, popping the cap with a church key attached to her belt. "Coca-Cola fixes everything. Or makes it worse. Depends on your perspective." Sigrid took the bottle. It was ice cold against her palm, a temperature she'd forgotten food could achieve. She sniffed it cautiously. "It smells like..." She couldn't find the word. "Medicine." "Yeah." Betty nodded. "Most people say that. Germans, Italians, even some Americans from up north. First Coke's always weird." Sigrid took the smallest possible sip. The carbonation attacked her tongue first, aggressive and strange. Then came the sweetness. So much sugar, followed by something bitter, something almost metallic. It tasted like what she imagined battery acid mixed with candy might taste like if battery acid were socially acceptable to drink. She made a face. Betty laughed. "Told you. It's terrible," Secret said. Then she took another sip. The second one was less shocking. The bubbles felt almost pleasant now, popping against the roof of her mouth. Absolutely terrible. She took a third sip. On the field, the Italian team was celebrating in the dugout. Players climbing over each other in a pile of jubilant limbs. The American pitcher kicked the dirt. His shoulders slumped in theatrical defeat. Someone cranked up a radio and swing music poured across the diamond. Benny Goodman, bright and brassy and alive. "Bottom of the 6th, Betty explained, though Secret had no idea what that meant. "We're down by 2 now. Martinez, that's the guy who just hit. He's been hot all game. Stole second twice, and Luis can't throw worth a damn." Sigrid nodded like this made sense. The Coca-Cola was halfway gone now. She hadn't meant to drink it so fast, but something about the cold, the sweetness, the way it made her throat tingle, it demanded consumption. Want another? Betty asked. Yes, Secret said immediately. Then, remembering herself, if it's allowed. Betty flagged down a vendor. A teenage boy with a wooden crate strapped to his chest. 2 more bottles appeared, caps already popped. Sigrid took one, the glass slippery with condensation. The American team was batting now. A stocky catcher stepped up to the plate. Practice swinging with aggressive confidence. The Italian pitcher, a thin man with a mustache that looked drawn on with pencil, wound up. The pitch came in low. The catcher swung anyway. Crack. Another towering shot. This one to left field. The Italian left fielder ran, jumped, crashed into the fence, and caught it. The American side groaned in collective anguish. The Italians screamed like they'd won the entire war. 3 men in the front row threw their hats. Someone's grandmother visiting from town rang a cowbell with religious fervor. Sigrid found herself on her feet screaming. No. Without conscious thought, her free hand clutching the bleacher rail. Betty was grinning at her. What? Secret demanded. You picked a side. I did not. You're literally booing the Italians right now. Secret looked down. She was in fact booing. When had that started? She sat back down, took another sip of Coca-Cola, and tried to look dignified. It didn't work. The next batter struck out swinging, and she booed again, louder this time. By the 7th inning, Secret had finished her 3rd Coke and was fully invested in the fate of men she'd never met, playing a game she didn't understand. When the American shortstop, a kid from Tennessee with ears like barn doors, hit a double that scored 2 runs, she screamed so loud her throat hurt. When the Italian second baseman made a diving catch to end the 8th inning, she threw her empty Coke bottle in frustration. It bounced harmlessly off the bleacher, but the intent was there. You're a natural, Betty said, offering her a 4th bottle. This is insane, Sigrid replied, accepting it. Yeah, best thing America's got going. The game went into extra innings, tied 7-7. The sun was setting now, painting the sky pink and orange, and someone had rigged up floodlights that buzzed and flickered, casting everything in harsh white light. The Italian team's best hitter came up. 2 outs, runner on 3rd. The entire camp held its breath. The pitch came in belt high. The batter connected with a sound like a gunshot. The ball screamed into center field. The American center fielder ran, glove extended, legs churning, and at the last possible second of. He hit the ground hard, rolled twice, and came up with the ball in his glove. Game over. Americans won 7-6. The crowd erupted. Sigrid found herself jumping up and down, screaming herself hoarse, hugging Betty Torres like they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Around her, American GIs and German PS and Italian prisoners were all celebrating together. The war temporarily forgotten in the shared ecstasy of a cot ball. Someone started singing, "Take me out to the ball game." Secret didn't know the words, but she hummed along anyway, swaying with the crowd. Her 4th Coca-Cola warm in her hand, but still good. Still impossibly good. As the crowd began to disperse, Betty turned to her. So, you get it now? Secret looked at the empty field, the trampled bases, the discarded peanut shells and bottle caps scattered like strange confetti. No, she admitted, but I don't think I need to. Betty smiled. Now you really get it. Walking back to the barracks, Secret felt lighter than she had in years. Her throat was raw from screaming. Her stomach was full of sugar and carbonation. She'd spent 2 hours not thinking about Hamburg, about the dead, about what waited when she went home. She'd spent 2 hours screaming about a ball, and it had been perfect. The trucks were already idling in the August heat when Frida realized she didn't know how to pack her life. She stood in the barracks holding a cotton dress, American-made, given to her by the Red Cross after her vermatched uniform was burned. The fabric stretched tight across her hips now. 14 pounds of hash browns and biscuits and real butter had changed her body in ways 4 years of war never did. She folded it once, twice, trying to make it fit in the small canvas bag they'd each been issued for repatriation. Around her, 23 women moved in silence. Clothes whispered against bunks. Footsteps creaked on wooden floors. Nobody was celebrating going home. Marlene sat on her bunk with a shoebox in her lap. Inside 43 Hershey's wrappers lay folded like love letters, silver and brown paper, each one representing a morning she'd allowed herself to be weak. She stared at them for a full minute, then placed the box in her suitcase between two wool sweaters. Evidence currency proof that something had happened here that she couldn't explain. Sigrid leaned against the window frame, watching American GIS set up strings of lights in the recreation yard. The camp commander had announced a farewell dance tonight, properly chaperoned. Geneva Convention appropriate. A local band from Shreveport was bringing instruments. There would be punch and cookies. They're gonna make us dance with them, Marlene said, her voice flat. One last humiliation. Or one last kindness, Frida said quietly. The camp was different in evening light. The strings of bulbs turned the recreation yard into something that looked almost magical. Louisiana humidity made halos around each light. The band, 5 men in mismatched suits, tuned their instruments on a small wooden stage. A trumpet made a sound like a question. The women arrived in a careful formation, still moving like soldiers, even in their Red Cross dresses. They clustered near the punch table, maintaining distance from the American GIS, who stood on the opposite side of the yard, equally uncertain. For 5 full minutes, nobody moved. Then the band started playing. Swing music, the kind that made you forget yourself, the kind that Jerome had hummed in the laundry room while Marlene pressed his shirts. A sergeant stepped forward and asked Frida to dance. He was polite, formal, his hands held exactly where they should be. She said yes because saying no seemed cruel to both of them. Within 3 songs, half the women were dancing. Sigrid found Betty Torres near the punch bowl. They'd been to 4 baseball games together since that first one in May. Betty had taught her to keep score. Sigrid had taught Betty how to swear in German. "You scared?" Betty asked, pouring punch into paper cups. Terrified, Sigrid admitted. She took the cup, tasted artificial fruit and too much sugar. "Hamburg is gone. Not damaged, gone. My mother's last letter said they're living in the basement of what used to be a bank." Betty didn't say anything. She just refilled Sigrid's cup. On the other side of the yard, Marlene stood frozen as Jerome Washington approached. He wore his dress uniform, the one she'd pressed so carefully it could cut glass. In his hand, a single Hershey's bar. Their first real conversation happened in the middle of 50 people and felt completely private. "For the trip," he said, holding it out. She took it, their fingers touched for less than a second. "Jerome," she stopped. Every word she'd learned in English fled. Her ideology, her training, everything she'd believed about hierarchy and blood and destiny. All of it dissolved in the face of this one simple gesture. "I know," he said quietly. "Me too." She slipped the chocolate into her pocket and walked away before she could cry in front of him. Before she could do something unforgivable like stay. Inga Breener sat on a bench near the edge of the lights, watching couples move across the makeshift dance floor. She hadn't danced in 6 years. Wasn't sure she remembered how. Dale Richter approached like he was defusing a bomb. Careful, terrified of making the wrong move. He was a farm boy from Iowa, 24 years old, with hands calloused from machinery, and a grandmother who still spoke German when she prayed. "I don't know how to ask this in your language," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "But would you dance with me? Just one." She looked at his face, earnest, nervous, kind. "Okay," she said. Her English was better than his German, but barely. They danced 3 songs without speaking. He wasn't good at it. She wasn't either. But somewhere between the second and third song, she realized his hand on her waist felt safer than anything had in 4 years. When the music stopped, he didn't let go immediately. "They're sending you back," he said. "Not a question. Tomorrow morning, New Orleans, then a ship to Bremen." "And then what?" She didn't answer because she didn't have one. Bremen was a crater. Cologne, where she was from, existed only in photographs. Her parents were dead. Her brother was missing. She was going back to a country that had been carved into pieces by the victors to stand in ration lines and rebuild ruins she hadn't created. "I have to go," she said, pulling away, but she didn't move. The camp commander's office still had lights on at 11 p.m. Captain Morris was finishing paperwork when ING knocked on the door. She'd walked there directly from the dance, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Miss Breener," he said, surprised. "Is something wrong?" Behind her, other women had followed. She hadn't asked them to. They'd just come. Ininga's English fell apart under the pressure. She stopped, started again. "Is there a way I can stay?" The room went silent. "Stay?" Morris repeated. "Not forever. Just longer. Maybe find work. I was radar technician. I can learn. Her voice cracked. She was begging and she didn't care. "Please, I don't want to go back to nothing." 15 people were watching now. GIS, who'd been walking past other prisoners who'd heard the commotion. Morris opened his mouth to respond, but NG wasn't done. In Germany, crying got you nothing, she said, the words tumbling out. Weakness was death. Here, she gestured at the camp, at the absurd abundance of it all. Here, crying got you seconds. More food, more kindness. I cried over hash browns, and your cook just brought me more. Her face was wet. She didn't wipe it away. Behind her, slowly, another hand raised. Frida, her face pale but determined. Then another secret who'd screamed at baseball games. A fourth woman, quiet until now. For hands in total. For women choosing the unknown over home. Dale Richter stood in the back of the room. He was crying too. The trucks left at dawn. Most of the women boarded with their small bags and their ghosts. Marlene climbed up last, turning once to see Jerome standing at attention, his face unreadable. She touched the Hershey's bar in her pocket and didn't look back again. The four, who stayed, watched the convoy disappear down the Louisiana dirt road. When the dust settled, Angie turned to find Dale beside her. I don't know what happens now, she said. Neither do I, he admitted. But my family's farm needs help, and I make pretty good hash browns. She almost laughed. Almost. The morning shift cook rang the breakfast bell across the camp. Steam rose from the Missal windows, carrying the smell of coffee and bacon and fried potatoes. Angie walked toward it, Dale at her side, choosing breakfast over the ruins, choosing seconds over nothing. The morning of departure split the barracks in half. 19 women dressed in their cleanest clothes pieced together from Red Cross donations and careful mending. They moved like sleepwalkers, folding threadbare sweaters, securing borrowed suitcases with twine. Nobody spoke above a whisper. The air tasted like endings. Frida stood by her bunk holding a dress that no longer fit. The seams strained across her hips, her shoulders, the body she'd rebuilt on American portions. She folded it anyway, pressing the fabric with palms that had stopped shaking weeks ago. Across the room, Marlene wrapped something in a handkerchief, small, rectangular, precious. The four who were staying kept to the far wall, watching witnesses to an exodus they'd refused to join. Angie Breener had barely slept. She'd spent the night writing letters to addresses that might not exist anymore, explaining a choice she couldn't fully explain to herself. Her hands still smelled like the soap from the laundry, American soap that made everything smell clean instead of just less dirty. The trucks arrived at 0800 hours. Captain Morris stood in the yard with a clipboard, checking names with the mechanical efficiency of a man who'd done this too many times. The women lined up without being told. Muscle memory from years of military discipline. Even now, even leaving, Marlene was third in line. She saw Jerome Washington standing near the motor pool, half hidden behind a supply truck. He wasn't supposed to be there. His shift didn't start until noon. Their eyes met across 50 feet of Louisiana dust. He stepped forward, stopped. Everyone was watching. He held out his hand. In it, one more Hershey's bar. Marlene's face did something complicated. She walked to him, every step deliberate, and took the chocolate from his palm. Their fingers touched for exactly 2 seconds. Neither spoke. What language could possibly hold this? She tucked the bar into her coat pocket right above her heart. Thank you, she said in English, the first word she'd ever spoken directly to him. Jerome nodded once. Safe travels, ma'am. The truck engine coughed to life. Marlene climbed aboard, settling onto the wooden bench between two women she'd known since Cherbourg. The vehicle lurched forward, and she turned to look back one last time. Jerome was already gone. The convoy rolled through the camp gates at 8:30. NG stood with Frida and Sigrid, watching dust plumes rise from the departing trucks. The sounds faded. Engine growl, rattling chassis, the creak of springs under human weight. Then silence. Well, Frida said finally, that's that. Captain Morris approached with paperwork. You four will remain in the barracks until we process your petitions. Could be weeks, could be months. Immigration's backed up clear to Washington. He paused, his expression softening. You understand? There's no guarantee. You might end up on a ship anyway. Just later. We understand. Ink said she did. She also understood that every extra day was a gift. Dale Richter appeared at the edge of the yard, still in his work fatigues. He'd been assigned to the motor pool for the morning specifically to avoid this moment, to make it easier. But here he was anyway, cap in hand, looking at Angie like she might vanish if he blinked. Breakfast is still on, he said. If you're hungry, Inga's stomach answered before she could. The others laughed. Real laughter, not the bitter kind. Sigrid linked arms with her. Hash browns? Secret asked. Hash browns. ING confirmed. They walked together toward the Missal. For women who'd chosen the unknown over the certainty of ruins. Dale fell into step beside ING close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He smelled like motor oil and the peppermint gum he was always chewing. My folks wrote back, he said quietly about what I asked. They said he swallowed hard. They said any friend of mine is welcome for as long as you need. Ink stopped walking, stared at him. Iowa just for a visit, I mean once you're cleared if you want. The words tumbled out faster. We've got the dairy farm and Ma's been saying she needs help with the garden, and there's a room above the barn that gets real good light in the mornings. Dale, he went quiet. Yes, Inga said. Yes, I want. His smile could have powered the entire camp. Inside the Missal, Cook Earl was already at his station, the griddle hissing with the first batch of the day. He saw them coming and started loading potatoes into the shredder without being asked. The familiar sound, metal teeth against starch, made Inga's throat tight. She'd cried here 6 months ago, sobbed into a tray of food while strangers watched. That version of herself felt impossibly far away now, separated not by time, but by 1,000 small kindnesses that had rebuilt her from the inside out. Earl slid 4 plates across the counter. Hash browns, crispy and golden. Scrambled eggs still steaming. Bacon that crackled when you touched it. Toast with real butter melting into the grain. Morning, ladies, he said. Welcome home. The words hung in the air. Frida picked up her fork. Crying got you seconds here, she said softly in German. What's that? Dale asked. Inga shook her head, smiling. Nothing, just remembering. They ate slowly, savoring each bite the way you do when you've known hunger. And around them, the Missal filled with the morning shift, GIs grabbing coffee, kitchen staff prepping lunch, the ordinary machinery of a day that stretched forward into possibility instead of ending in rubble. Halfway through her plate, ING set down her fork. I don't want to go back, she said out loud, testing the words again. They still felt true. Then don't, Secret said simply. We already chose, and they had. The 4 of them, sitting in an American mess hall in August 1945, eating potatoes fried in butter, while the rest of their unit sailed toward a country that existed mostly as memory now. Every woman who'd left would face that reality soon enough. The hunger, the cold, the questions from authorities about what they'd done during the war. Here, nobody asked. Here, Earl just brought more coffee when your cup ran low. Marlene would board her ship in New Orleans tomorrow, clutching that final Hershey's bar. She'd make it to Hamburg by October, find the city unrecognizable, survive 2 brutal winters on ration cards and black market cigarettes. In 1948, she'd receive a letter with an Iowa postmark and a photograph of ING and Dale on their wedding day. That same week, Jerome Washington would write asking if she wanted to come back. She'd say yes. But this morning in Camp Ruston, the future was just steam rising from breakfast plates and the sound of Dale explaining baseball statistics to ING, who was trying very hard to care. 43 years later, a college student with a tape recorder would sit across from Inga Richter in her Iowa farmhouse and ask about the moment everything changed. And Inga would be 70 by then, hands weathered from decades of dairy farming, voice still carrying traces of Hamburg in the vowels. She'd think for a long time, staring through her kitchen window at fields her husband had taught her to love. The hash browns, she'd say finally the first morning. The student would look confused. ING would smile. I cried into my food, completely fell apart in front of all those soldiers. And the cook, Earl, his name was Earl, he took my tray, filled it again and just brought me more. No punishment, no shame, just more food. Her voice would crack slightly on the next part. In Germany, crying got you nothing. Weakness was currency you couldn't afford. But here, she'd pause, the memory still visceral after 4 decades. Crying got you seconds. The tape would run for another hour, capturing stories of baseball games and chocolate bars and the exact way American jazz sounded the first time she heard it. But that moment, the hash browns, the tears, the simple act of being given more, that was the one the student would play for her professor, would transcribe for the oral history archive, would remember years later when teaching her own students about the strange small ways that wars actually end. Not with treaties or sereners, but with a cook who sees someone crying and decides that what they need most is seconds.